Hello, this is Paul Lucas for Jumpstart Nature Photography. And now we're getting ready to start segments around composition, the art of photography. So this is part one, just a quick introduction to ideas around composition. And as always, as a quick introduction, you can see my work at paullucasphotography.com. I'm happy to speak at your local organization for no charge, give a Jumpstart Nature workshop presentation. I'm also available for hire for classes and workshops, a 2 or 3 day. The material I'm covering in these sets of presentations cover 2 or 3 days with field work. If you're interested in getting copies of the presentation or have any questions about photography, send me an email at paul@jumpstartnaturephotography.com. paul@jumpstartnaturephotography.com. That's the email address. And also, I'd encourage you to consider sending in some photographs for a YouTube photographic critique session. These are positive and constructive critiques of your work, same as I use in my class. If you're interested, send me an email. The email is paul@jumpstartnaturephotography.com. So as if you remember in the goals of this course, the first 6 presentations that we covered the craft of photography. How do I make choices on my lens, any filters, shutter speed, aperture opening, ISO setting to realize the vision, the creative vision of my photograph, my art. So now we're going to spend 4 presentations around some ideas on composition. And again, composition is a huge topic with lots of ideas, lots of activities, lots of exercises. So this is just some set of ideas to help you, and throughout this series of composition presentations, it's some ideas to help you get started in your photographic journey. Composition introduction. So I like to start with a few quotes to think about things. So Proust said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And I like that quote because I think it's important to realize that you don't have to travel far to get really great art. You can find it in your own backyard, no matter where you live. I'm fortunate to live in north of Chicago, near Lake Michigan, and that has provided me a lot of opportunities for great photographs. But I didn't have to travel to some exotic places, right? And so keep that in mind. Composition, a way to think of it is, as it says, is an organization of all the elements within the image. And what you leave out is as important as what you leave in. So keep that in mind. Sometimes the exclusion part is just as important. So a great image consists of several different aspects. A great subject, always a challenge to find, but something to keep in mind. Your composition skill, how you've developed your eyes, the kinds of tools you use in composition, and your technical skill, the things we covered in the craft of photography. So composition is the arrangement of the parts of the image into a harmonious whole. So you think about your images as you create them, and you have to look beyond just looking through your viewfinder to try and imagine what it's going to look like on a screen or printed and how that's going to work. The color, the elements that are in the photograph, the placement of those elements, all those things help with the arrangement of the parts in the image to make it a harmonious whole. So a good composition often has a 3D kind of feeling. It has a way to pull the viewer into the image and holds the viewer's attention. It can help lead them through the photograph and allow places for the viewer's eye to rest. And you want to look in creating your composition, this is something I'll repeat over and over again, is to remove any unwanted distractions. Now, sometimes unwanted distractions can be removed by simply slightly changing your perspective or view in the photograph that you're creating. Other times, there's things we can't remove, and we might have to use Photoshop or Lightroom to remove those. And those are okay. We're not doing a documentary photograph that's going to appear in a newspaper or a magazine or on a television news program. We're not doing it for legal purposes. We're doing it for artistic purposes. So there's nothing wrong with doing some Photoshop editing of a photograph if you can't remove all the distracting elements. But I always say shoot with intent, use the full frame of your photograph possible. Start with that mindset, shooting with intent. and using the whole frame of your camera, all the sensor space, all of its square inches, to get as much data as possible. All the real estate of your sensor. That's the word I wanted, to capture that full image without having to crop it at the end, or make a change after you've taken the photograph. So I'm not saying that every composition you're not going to end up cropping, but think about that and shoot with intent. So Elliot Porter, a well-known color, landscape, and nature photographer, I encourage you to look at his work, said great compositions bring order out of chaos. As we look around the world and all those things, there's so many things out there when we're trying to create a photograph. How do we bring order to that, quote, chaos? Great photographers simplify compositions to force a viewer's attention on the subject. Sometimes, so it could be thought of as a minimalist approach. And Ken Rockwell, who has a great website, kenrockwell.com, talks about, it's mainly, in my opinion, it's mostly a gear site, a lot of reviews about gears, but Ken is a wonderful photographer, internationally published, has lots of great articles on composition. You have to just look for them. Ken likes to use funny acronyms to remind people of compositional ideas, and one that I'll mention here is the SEX acronym for simplification and exclusion. So Ken's got a wonderful example of simplification and exclusion in that article. So I would recommend taking a look at kenrockwell.com. So just remember that idea. So just an example of a composition that is very minimalist and very powerful, I think. So simplification and exclusion, bringing order out of chaos and removing distracting elements. Notice there's nothing on the edges or the borders that take away from that composition. That's a very key thing. So good compositions often give you a three-dimensional feel by having a distinct foreground, middle ground, and background, FMB. Foreground, middle ground, background. I'll repeat it one more time. FMB. Foreground, middle ground, background, all working together. And what also enhances that is textural differences. So in this photograph, you have the sandy gravel as a foreground element. You have the lake, the water in the lake, as a middle ground, and the sky with the clouds and the sun as a background. So it gives you a sense of depth, a dimensionality, and they're all working together. And they're compositionally, they have different textural characteristics to help emphasize that three-dimensionality. Remember, our cameras and our photographs take two-dimensional things. So we have to provide visual clues to our viewers to make it seem three-dimensional and have a depth, to create that feeling of them being in the scene. Close-ups are good if there's some symmetry, just as an example and a thought. So the symmetry in the middle of the flower, the symmetry in the leaves. And even if you're outside and it's a windy day, you might find good compositions, even in less than perfect weather. So in this example, you can see my shutter speed is 1/4 of a second to get that blur, to get that abstract blur of those Blackeyed Susans. And again, all these compositions are taken nearby. In fact, I'll back up. This photograph was taken in my backyard. I have a variety of Illinois flowers native to Illinois, cone flowers and Blackeyed Susans that are growing in my backyard. This one as well was taken in my backyard. So to get great, interesting compositions, the point is you don't have to go far. You can do it close to home. So always look around and for new and different compositions. Keep your mind open and be open for the unexpected. I was on the lake shooting I live about a mile from Lake Michigan, and there's a great public beach there that I can go and shoot from. And I was out shooting in late December, probably crazy to be on the beach because a lot of it was iced over. And the skies just weren't cooperating with me. And I was, I was a little disappointed. I'm getting ready to turn around. And I'd missed this walking onto the beach, but there were these sunglasses frozen into the beach near these rocks. And with the sun rising, with that warm glow of the sun, I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting composition fun composition with some interesting textures and color and light. So be open, look around. You never know what you're going to find. I think of landscape and nature photography and the big tent idea. It's not just about showing pictures of trees or forests or plants or whatever. They can have human elements in them as well, as you've seen those pictures with the broken down pier in a previous picture. So certainly we can use human elements in the composition of our landscape and nature photography, and I think we're still in the big tent of landscape and nature photography. So Freeman Patterson, unfortunately, Elliot Porter, who I quoted earlier, has passed away, but a lot of his great work is available. Freeman Patterson is a Canadian-based photographer and still available to take classes from, and I would encourage you to look him up on the internet. And, if you are so inclined, take a class. Freeman says, we discover new compositions only when we are ready to receive the idea. So as we grow in our compositional experience and stealing from other photographers, I'll say that, great artists steal and get ideas, then we're ready to create these new compositions. And he also said, I think photography begins with things that matter to you. So what's important to you? What do you like? I really love forest preserves in the area. I love the natural beauty I find there. So you can find great compositional ideas and photography from those elements around you. And again, it's things you can find close to home. So learning to see, this is a huge subject in itself. And over this presentation, the next three, we're going to talk about ideas about tools of composition and seeing things. But some things to think about. Just be aware of what's around you. It's hard. Sometimes it's an overwhelming amount of chaos, right? We're trying to bring order to that. But look around a bit. Think about, before picking up your camera, look for what you think is a good subject. And then, choose that subject if it says something to you. Oops, sorry, wrong way. And then, once you've looked at that subject, and I'll just say one more idea on that is, then start, bring the camera up to your eye and look at how you might frame that, and move to the right, move to the left, stand up, squat down, whatever it might be, change your viewpoint, etc. In that composition. So in your compositions and learning to see, you want to show your insight, your vision, your artistry, and all those things will develop over time. In a few weeks, a few months, or a few years, you might look back at your photographs and realize, gee, I've got a style, or I have a theme kind of in my photography. And how do you show those things? By showing, how you see that subject. And if possible, you might be telling a story or looking for ways to emotionally engage the viewer, to bring them into your photograph, to help them experience what you might have experienced out in the woods or on the lake or wherever your photograph might be that day. So again, I can't emphasize the idea of not trying to put too much in the image. Remember I said, think simplification and exclusion, right? So Edward Western, another wonderful photographer who's passed on, I would suggest checking out, again, his work. He said composition is the strongest way of seeing. So here's an idea of too many things in the photograph, right? So this was an earlier photograph when I was just kind of starting to dip my toes in the water of more creative photography. And I was at the Chicago Botanic Garden looking for compositional elements. I saw this bee and this flower, and I thought, wow, this is great. And this was the initial shot that I took. And it's kind of a static shot and not as much interesting, because what is a photograph about? The bee and the flower, and trying to engage you in that experience. But there's just some distracting elements to it. So I cropped the photo. Like I said, cropping's not a bad thing. If I had a little more experience when I've taken this, I would have thought about different shots. Of course, we have a bee, so and it's moving. We have a limited opportunity to shoot that bee, photograph that bee, I should say. So I ended up cropping that photograph to nearly a square and bringing it in. And I did, when I took the photograph, I intentionally thought about how I wanted to have the bee primarily, as much as possible, in focus in the center of the flower, and the rest of the flower soft. There's nothing wrong with that. That was my compositional idea. The area where I needed improvement in the composition was I should have gotten closer to that flower to get to this composition, which I think is a much stronger composition. So I could use a macro lens, or I could have used or stepped up closer to the subject to get that composition. But again, the idea is to minimize the distracting elements, to think about what's on our corners and edges and in the background, what kinds of things might distract our eye and draw it away from our main subject or intent of the composition. And that's the end. That's a quick introduction to composition. So we're going to have 3 more segments coming up, and we'll cover some more tools and ideas in composition. So I hope that helps to get you started on your journey, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.